You take a break. You step away from your screen, maybe make a cup of coffee, scroll through your phone for a few minutes, and then sit back down. And somehow, you feel just as drained as before. Not more tired, not less, just the same quiet heaviness sitting behind your eyes. You probably assumed you didn't rest long enough, or that you need more sleep, or that something is wrong with your routine. But research suggests the problem might not be the length of your break at all. This is a pattern that shows up constantly in the lives of office workers, students, and anyone spending long hours doing cognitive work. You build up mental fatigue over a few hours. You take what feels like a reasonable pause, and then you return to your task, only to find that your thinking is still slow, your focus still shallow, your patience still thin. The break happened, the recovery did not. And that gap between what a break is supposed to do and what it actually does is worth understanding carefully. The most common explanation people reach for is quantity. They assume they simply didn't rest long enough. 5 minutes wasn't enough, so next time they try 10. 10 didn't help, so they try 20. But research on cognitive fatigue suggests that duration alone is rarely the deciding factor. What matters more is what the brain is doing during that time, not how much time passes on the clock. Mental fatigue is not the same as physical tiredness. When your muscles are exhausted after exercise, they need time and inactivity to recover. But cognitive fatigue operates differently. It is less about depletion and more about sustained demand. The brain, particularly the parts involved in attention, decision-making, and self-regulation, becomes fatigued not just from effort but from continuous engagement without a shift in mental mode. A break that keeps those same systems active does very little to reduce that strain. This is where most short breaks quietly fail. A common break looks like this. You stop working, you pick up your phone, and you spend 8 minutes reading news headlines, checking messages, scrolling through images, or watching short videos. All of those activities feel passive. They feel like rest because you are no longer working, but each of them still demands the same attentional systems that you are using at your desk. You are still processing language, still making small decisions, still responding to rapid visual information. The cognitive load never actually dropped. Research in attention science has consistently pointed to something called directed attention, the kind of focused, voluntary concentration required for most modern work. Reading reports, answering emails, analyzing data, writing code. All of these draw heavily from the same pool, and that pool does not refill simply because you stop the task. It refills when the demand on it is reduced or redirected in a fundamentally different way. Consider what a typical desk worker does during a 10-minute break. They close their laptop and immediately open their phone. The visual and mental stimulation is nearly continuous. There is almost no point in that 10 minutes where the brain is allowed to simply drift. Research suggests that unstructured, low-stimulation time, the kind where the mind is allowed to wander without a feed or a screen or a task, is actually one of the more effective conditions for cognitive recovery. And yet, it is almost completely absent from how most people spend their breaks. This becomes clearer when you look at the difference between types of rest. A walk outside with no destination and no podcast tends to feel less productive than scrolling through a news app, but studies in environmental psychology suggest the opposite effect on mental restoration. Natural or low-demand environments allow involuntary attention, a kind of gentle, effortless noticing, to take over. This gives directed attention a chance to recover. A screen, almost regardless of what is on it, tends to keep the directed system engaged. There is also a subtler issue that most people do not consider. The transition into and out of a break carries its own cognitive cost. If you are 3 sentences into a difficult paragraph and you stop to check your messages, your brain does not simply pause and resume. Research on task switching shows that there is a residual cost to shifting focus, something often called attention residue. Part of your mind remains partially anchored to the interrupted task, reducing the quality of both the break and the return to work. This explains something a lot of people have experienced without being able to name it. You come back from a break and you feel slightly disoriented, or it takes an unusually long time to find your rhythm again, or you feel like you need another break almost immediately. It is not a discipline problem. It is a structural one. The break did not create the mental separation it needed to create in order to allow recovery. There is also something worth acknowledging about how modern environments are designed. The apps on your phone, the notification systems, the information feeds, all of them are built to attract and hold attention. They are not passive tools. When you reach for your phone during a break, You are entering a system that has been carefully engineered to keep your directed attention active. Resting inside that system is genuinely difficult, not because of personal weakness, but because of how the environment functions. And here is the quiet truth that this all leads to. When a short break fails to reduce mental fatigue, it is usually not because the break was too short. It is because the break was functionally not a break at all. The activity changed, the cognitive demand did not. The brain continued doing in a slightly different form exactly what it needed to stop doing. This does not mean that breaks are useless, or that you should feel guilty about how you currently spend them. Understanding the mechanism does not automatically solve the problem, because the conditions that make real rest difficult, screens, stimulation, constant connectivity, are deeply embedded in how most people live and work. Recognizing that your break failed does not tell you what a successful break requires, because that varies, and because changing ingrained habits is genuinely difficult, even when the reasons are understood. It also does not mean that all screen time during breaks is equally harmful, or that every person experiences cognitive fatigue in the same way. Some tasks are more demanding than others. Some people have higher tolerances. Context shapes everything. This is not a universal prescription, but what it does offer is a more accurate frame for something that confuses and frustrates a lot of people. The feeling of taking a break and not recovering is not a mystery. It is not a sign that you are unusually tired or unusually weak. It is often a predictable outcome of a break that kept the wrong systems running. The rest happened on a calendar. It did not quite happen in the brain. That is worth sitting with for a moment, not as a reason to change anything necessarily, but simply as a clearer picture of something most people experience and most people misread. The fatigue was real. The break was real. The gap between them was also real, and it had a reason.